Good day. I'm Christine Ives-Singer, a global energy access advocate and senior advisor to the SHINE Collab. Welcome to the second webinar in SHINE's Power to the People series. Today, you will be part of a conversation that will take us from rural, remote, unelectrified areas of Zimbabwe, Nigeria, and Kenya to the forefront of global and regional climate justice and anti-fossil fuel movements. You'll go on this journey within a framing of recent research that seeks to align climate adaptation needs and benefits with energy access, leading to more resilient households and communities. Some of you may have joined our first webinar back in June that provided a multi-perspective look at a gender-just energy transition and why it matters. A gender-just energy transition argues that women-led, community-driven renewable energy access improves livelihoods, well-being, and climate resilience, while bolstering women's leadership in creating a true just transition. It centers gender and new energy access as core to a just energy transition, elements that the SHINE Collab and others believe are quite weak in current energy transition designs and funding. The esteemed panelists in our June program shared a framing on just transition, the roots and how it evolved, with examples from Kentucky to South Africa, asking the question, whose interests matter in a transition, and what are we transitioning from and to? That spirited conversation made clear that it's going to take all sectors, all sources of funds and investments, and multiple actors from the public, private, philanthropic, and NGO communities to build the economic and political power that will allow a transformative transition from an extractive to a regenerative economy, the just of the transition. Knowledge and learning is a core pillar of SHINE's program, and this webinar series seeks to explore the gaps, showcase the evidence, and identify the opportunity to forge radical collaborations that puts people, power, and justice at the center of a just energy transition. And it demonstrates the role of decentralized renewable energy solutions as an enabler of transformative and sustained power shifts for women and communities. Yes, for SHINE, power has a double meaning. It means electricity, and it means control of decision-making, assets, and futures. The SHINE webinar series has multiple objectives: to articulate what a just energy transition looks like in practice, emphasizing the importance of gender and community-driven solutions, to challenge the dominant, technocratic, top-down approach to the energy transition and offer a people-centered, democratized alternative, to build bridges across the gender, climate, and energy investment sectors, breaking down silos, and lead to less fragmentation of funding and more efficiency of program design, and to influence the energy and climate finance sectors to intentionally engage in promoting a gender-just energy transition. Now, these are really big asks for a 2-hour session. SHINE's hope is to open doors and prime the pump of funders, investors, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and advocates to look beyond business as usual, top-down, we've got the answer program designs, allowing a reshaping of the energy access, climate, and gender justice agendas, policies, and funding. We're off to a good start. As represented by the diversity of those who registered for this webinar, over 225 registrants. We have diversity geographically, sectorally, cutting across the energy, climate, and gender nexus, with advocates, researchers, entrepreneurs, investors, and funders in our virtual room today. So let's get started. A few housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar is being recorded, and this link and the link from our June webinar will be shared. We'll also share links to the speakers and any reports or references that are made during our conversation. And we have set aside at the end of this at the end of the second hour, time to engage with you on a question and answer. So please share with us your questions as we go forward. And with that, let's get started. Mela is the director of the SHINE Collab. Kevin Johnstone is a senior researcher at IIED, the International Institute for Environment and Development. Sonia is the head of campaigning and organizing at 350.org. Olasimba Sojinrin is the chief operating officer at Solar Sister. And Virginia Sapanda is the founder and CEO of Viral, a name drawn from its values: viability, integrity, reliability, and lasting relationships. Something we would all want from our finance partner. So let's get started into the conversation. I've asked Kevin to lead us off and really give us a high-level summary of the recent research he and colleagues at IIED have done to give us a framing of what a community-led energy access means and what's the type of system and institutional changes that we would need to see for this type of an approach to really take off. So Kevin, if I can turn over to you to get us started and give us that framing.
Great. Thanks so much, Christine. And thanks very much to SHINE for inviting me here today. I'm really pleased to be here. Particularly looking forward to hearing from the experiences of our great panelists. But in the meantime, as Christine mentioned, I'm a senior researcher at IED. My focus is on energy access, how it can support livelihoods, climate adaptation, resilience, and trying to apply various lenses, including gender, to my work as well. And I'm going to try and tee up some critical concepts around energy and climate, which I'm mostly pulling, as Christine mentioned, from a report that I co-wrote with Sam Green called Energizing Adaptation. And just to kind of start with the basics, huge strides have been made in expanding access in the last 15 years, access to energy and access to cleaner cooking systems. But the gap is enormous and remains so, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where 600 million people, about half the population, does not have access to electricity, and about 900 million don't have access to modern cooking fuels. The energy sector, and particularly electricity, has traditionally been dominated by governments implementing large grid systems, and it's very much implemented from a top-down engineering standpoint, and it really focuses on the technologies, the components, their interactions, the amount of energy generated, and all of these types of things. And grids will continue to be very important going forward, but often these designs do not incorporate important sociocultural aspects and have little meaningful involvement of the communities and households who want to use them. And this tends to reduce buy-in, reduces usefulness of these systems for the different end users. And so we've got decentralized renewable energy products, things like solar-powered lights, solar-powered irrigation pumps, more efficient cook stoves. These are some examples of many other technologies. And when combined with supporting services, so not just the technology, but combined with other supporting services, has helped us accelerate in the last couple of years. And it's offering new pathways to reach more and different kinds of people. And this is really important because people have different strategies and different opportunities in using energy to achieve their desired outcomes. Technologies don't operate in vacuum, they sit within contexts. And on top of that, people need to interact with them in order for them to be useful. And so a person's so-called positionality, their personal views, their values, where they are at a time and a location, this will influence how a person engages with the world. And this is influenced through characteristics like gender, age, economic status, language, and so forth. And this really shapes people's opportunities. And to make this really concrete, we can think about a smallholder farmer, and farming in general is so tough. And climate impacts are making it even tougher in some places. And much can go wrong between prepping land, buying your inputs, harvesting, selling crops, and so forth. A solar irrigation pump may help lift water, and that's critically important, but this is really just a small aspect of running a farm. And often a solar irrigation pump will need to be bundled with other things to support people, but things like end user financing, extension services, access to markets, and so forth, and to really help farmers achieve higher harvests and higher incomes and other outcomes they want to achieve. And strategies to achieve those will vary too. So a female farmer versus a male farmer will have very different strategies. So for example, a study in Benin found that some men focus their efforts on commercial crops, so-called cash crops. And this was partly to qualify for subsidies that were available, but many women in the same households preferred to focus on crops for household consumption to ensure food security for the family. And so these are very different strategies, very different outcomes, focuses, and so forth. And this has implications for decentralized renewable energy products. Special focus on the technology often comes at the expense of sociocultural elements, and really the root causes of what makes people vulnerable to climate change. And this really risks maladaptation and causing real harm. Gender norms often dictate access to resources and opportunities within locales. And this can result in many women having limited access to critical services like financing, training, other education, and so forth. And this is in addition to the double burden of household responsibilities. And this can act as limiters, reducing ability to access and control technologies. Interventions can shift structural barriers like gender norms. If they can do that and address the root causes of vulnerability, so-called transformative adaptation, I think that's what we need to be aiming for. And this requires us to think more holistically about people, about their context, and to really co-design with people. And this brings me to the idea of community resilient development, which the IPCC defines as the process of evaluating, valuing, acting, and adjusting various options for mitigation, adaptation, and sustainable development shaped by societal values as well as contestations of those values. Full disclosure, I should also mention that IIED is the current host of the IPCC chair. That is not the reason I use the quote. I think it really sums up what we should be doing and what we should be aiming for with energy. Our report covers a lot. My time is running short, and I think people really want to hear from the panelists, and I do too. But quickly, just to highlight some recommendations, for example, energy access stakeholders could link more closely with the locally led adaptation principles that talk about investing in local capabilities, addressing structural inequalities, collaborative action through whole of society approaches, and these kinds of things. And I'd like to end on a final note that there's been this narrative that in the energy access space, something along the lines of private sector knows best. And I think we're really starting to see the limitations of that narrative. And there's a need to embrace different types of delivery models and supporting services for different people in different contexts. And I think it's really important to stress that what works in one spot may not work in another spot. What works for a female-headed household may not work for a male-headed household. And this has serious implications on our investment choices. In short, everything we're trying to do is specific to each context: energy access needs, climate adaptation, gender norms, climate impacts, and so forth. And we should really start at the context. And to me, that points towards community-led renewable energy interventions. Thanks very much. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panelists today.
Kevin, thank you so much for giving us that framing. And I think just one piece I'd like to pull out from there is something which SHINE and I know others on the line have really focused on, which is that we need to not just look at renewable energy solutions, particularly decentralized standalone solar solutions, as a commodity. We need to really be thinking about what do these clean energy solutions enable, and what are the elements and they're cross-sectoral, the cross-sectoral inputs that are necessary to enable these solutions to actually have the impacts to be transformative and sustained over time. So having come from a world where the enterprise is the driver, and I truly believe in it, Your comment about understanding the limitations of it and understanding that it cannot be the sole means by which we address energy poverty is a very critical point, I think, which informs this discussion, and hopefully how others also think about the just energy transition. So with that, I'd like to turn to my colleague Mela Chapanda, who's the director of the SHINE Collab, and ask her to share just a short introduction to SHINE, which I'm sure some of you on the line are already familiar with, but if not, we'll tease you to learn more, and also to take us to the world of Bikita in Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much, Christine. The SHINE Collab is working on ensuring or on enabling women in the hard-to-reach areas to have access to gender just, climate just, decentralized renewable energy, and working at resourcing the communities as well as the women-led power enterprises, which we believe are part of the community that we're working with. And therefore, we are working on the intersections of gender equality, on climate and energy as well. And we consider the issue of energy as a justice issue. And I'm going to be giving the example of Bikita, where we are working. But currently, SHINE is working in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, and in South Africa. But for purposes of this webinar today, I want to focus on Bikita, and because it really explains why energy is also a justice issue. We all know the drive towards renewables and the conversations on just energy transitions. But as we are working with the community in Bikita, and why Bikita, maybe someone may ask, Bikita is the hub of lithium mining in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe is the largest lithium producer on the continent. It has the largest lithium deposits, and the community in Bikita has been living with lithium mining and the severe impacts of lithium mining since the 1950s up to now. And the extraction of lithium has actually intensified as the demand for lithium is also increasing because of the just energy transitions. And this is where now energy becomes a justice issue, because the negative impacts of the extraction, of the production, of the energy systems are not equal. Communities, usually communities who are hosting the mines, whether these are the mines, we have seen that in the fossil fuels industry, where communities who are living in disaster-prone areas because of extraction, communities who are hosting fossil fuels become the poorest in the country. And the same with Bikita. The same is now happening when it comes to as well the critical minerals that are needed in the renewable energy sector. The community of Bikita is living in extreme energy poverty, but they are carrying the severe impacts of the extraction of lithium, which is used in the production of batteries for the electric cars, for our solar systems. And therefore, Christine, I was discussing with Christine yesterday, and we're discussing the issue of just transition for who? I mean, energy transition for who and for what? And this is really the question that is asked when we start talking about we need to transition, because the communities who are very critical in terms of hosting the mines are asking the questions, why the energy transition and for who are we transitioning? Because currently we are seeing the energy transition as being just a technological transition, where the people who have electricity now and who have access to energy now that is driven by the fossil fuels industry are the same people who are transitioning now to renewable energy. And the communities that do not have continue not having. But on top of that, they are carrying the burden of ensuring that the whole world transitions to renewable energy. And this is why as well, we are talking about, if we are going to ensure that communities who are living in the remote areas, communities who are living in resource-rich areas have access to electricity or energy, then it means that energy needs to be decentralized. I am not going to focus much on how the national grids across the continent and across the world have failed phenomenally in making sure that communities in rural areas and in indigenous territories have access to electricity. And therefore, the solution lies in ensuring that we have an energy system that is controlled by the people who are using that service, and it is informed by the people who need it and who face the severe impacts of energy poverty, in this case, which are women, and which takes us now to where, just before I round off, to what Kevin just shared briefly about the economies, the local economies, which are largely driven by women. The local economies need to be resilient in the face of the climate crisis, which is the crisis of our time. And Kevin touched on how the whole system is centered on cash cropping, which does not serve the needs of the communities, because this is intended for the global market or for the regional markets. And the same goes with energy. When we talk about now transitioning the institutions, whether it's government, whether it is large corporations, they are focusing on large, very large, or mega hydro, mega solar farms, which do not guarantee energy access to the people who desperately need the energy access, like the communities in Bikita. And SHINE is working with the community in Bikita to ensure that they are resourced, but before they are even resourced, we are using a bottom-up approach or participatory methodologies to ensure that they inform what they want based on their local economies and based on their needs. And therefore, we are looking at, before the end of this year, having conversations with the power enterprises, with the communities, with the CSOs, working in the energy, climate, and gender sectors, to sit down and speak and listen to the communities in Bikita, be able to tell us, to define, and to ask questions about all these narratives that are coming. And therefore, we can be able to learn together, to inform policy together, and be able to pilot what we are envisioning together in ways that builds the power of the people, instead of making them passive consumers of ideas and solutions that are coming from elsewhere. Thank you very much. Over to you, Christine.
Thank you very much, Mela. I was trying to write down that last sentence. It's really so much an indication of what SHINE is trying to achieve with its partners across the energy, climate, and gender feminist spectrum. I'm very pleased to bring Sonia Kwame into this conversation as coming from 350.org, because part of what Mela just talked about was the continuing impact of a extraction model. And I think it's really interesting to hear from 350.org about how they are incorporating within their advocacy and their anti-fossil fuel work, the concept of community, the concept of solutions through decentralized renewable energy. So I'm quite pleased, Sonia. Welcome to the conversation, and please share with us.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you to everyone who has joined the webinar. So I just want to start by just looking at just some key global things to remind ourselves that we have a global target to actually halve our emissions by 2030 in order to avoid the worst forms of climate change. And this is at a risk of being met. I think it's something that we should be reminded about. and the fact that since 350.org was established, we started with fossil fuel organizing. Just like Christine was saying, we are now working a lot into renewable energy and no to fossil fuels by keeping fossils in the ground. And with all the changes that we are seeing, the world is evolving, we are also changing our approach. And so what we are doing now is that we've transitioned into what we call solutions campaigning, where we emphasize on community-centered, clean, renewable energy. And at the community level, we work very closely with partners who also work with women, particularly women, because they are the users of the energy. And one of the things I really like is what we heard from Mela, which is about the fact that energy is actually a justice issue. And so renewable energy is actually a form of resistance to fossil fuels because they are linked by two sides of the same coin. Because when a world is powered by community-centered renewable energy, it becomes an alternative vision to a world that is destroyed by fossil fuels. And so we look at, as a global movement, our approach is to push for solutions to the climate crisis through a combination of three key things. And the first is that definitely we need to keep fossils in the ground, no new extractions. I think that that is a bottom line for all of us here. And we also need to replace fossil fuels with clean renewable energy and transform our energy infrastructure to support that. I think that is super important. And it's really sad when you see a lot of communities around, for example, the Eco Pipeline, who do not even have basic electricity. And many of these women are cooking in the nights, using fuel that's, you say, oh, it's actually creating pollution. Yet it's not just about they using fuel, firewood, but the thing is that have our systems, have our policies been set in a way that supports them to actually do clean cooking, for example. This is something to think about. And the fact that we need to also improve energy efficiency. So how does this all connect? And so we all know that policy change happens at the national level. But then what is the point of big events, which 350 does? So yes, we campaign with partners. We are a movement. We campaign with local communities. Yet you find us at the COPs, the G20s, the G8s, the big meetings globally. This is because these meetings provide a great opportunities to bridge what we are doing, for us to push for something that we'll call a collective action, and which is very important. And I want to remind all of us that who are the key big polluters? And who are the key, we will not say they are victims of those who bear the brunt. I call them resilients and survivors of the impact of climate change. And majority of them are women. And so what we do is that we use these events to bring in these voices, the voices of the women, the voices of local communities who bear the brunt and have been resilient and have actually survived the negative impacts of climate injustice. And so definitely rich developed countries, we all know, are responsible for the crisis. And every time you see that the goalpost is shifting. If you love soccer, like many of us do on our continent, if the goalpost for a soccer match shifts, when you are going to score, they reduce the goalpost. When they are scoring, it increases. You know you are going to lose the match. And just picture the issue of the goalpost and connect this to the fact that commitments have been made and they need to pay up. We need a just transition, and community members need justice, which is very important. And this is where 350 connects that dot. So there are opportunities to engage globally on climate justice through public pressure and mass movements and mobilizations and protests, which is led by not just civil society, because the word civil society, even though it's broader outside government, but I want to specifically mention women and indigenous communities through what we call people power. Definitely policy advocacy is in the mix, media engagement is in the mix, but it is not enough. And just to remind us, we thought we were making progress with the Paris Agreement because in 2015, it was like a game changer where parties reached a landmark agreement to combat climate change and accelerate and intensify actions and investments needed for that sustainable low carbon future, where we are going to push and limit temperature increase to down to a further 1.5 degrees. But what has happened? We all know that very little is happening. And so that work at the community level needs to be escalated globally. Those voices need to be heard, because even if a government, say, changes legislations, has policies that will promote, let's say, solar, it is not enough. What Mela said for me is very profound, because if you have fuel, which is driven by big corporates, and they are looking at mega industrialized projects, that is not working for local communities. You need access to clean fuel that women need, especially at the community level. Men who are also doing other forms of livelihood work, as well as women who need for that level of work. And so that is super important. And so what I want to say is that we have a $1 trillion financing gap, and that money is not just there. And so what it means is that there is the need for public pressure. Local people sitting in their communities many times feel very helpless, because sadly, even though we have elected government, there is a social contract for governments to respond to citizens. Sadly, in many African countries, you are not really seeing much of that. So global pressure is also needed, where organizations like 350, SHINE Collab working, even though with local communities, you have a global voice. The Oxfams, all the big NGOs, the national ones, regional ones, working together and putting pressure. And so I think that this is super important. And so I want to just end by saying that money needs to be distributed. For me, that's important. And this distribution has to be fair. It has to be accessible in ways that will actually touch the lives of women and vulnerable men in our communities. But many times you hear of big announcements and you don't see anything happening. And so that is where the pressure comes in. We need the stories, we need the evidence to actually tell whether this is happening. I chanced upon a report by the African Development Bank. We talked about the fact that green jobs will definitely benefit women. But the interesting twist was the fact that many of these green jobs are in low-income areas, which women will be accessing. And so that makes me really sad. And so what it means is that there is a lot to push. And so, despite the fact that 3 billion people still need action because they bear the brunt and have survived, and we are still seeing some form of progress, COP29 is happening in Azerbaijan. Some people have excuses as to why they don't need to be there. We are going there, and we are carrying the voices of local communities. We don't speak on their behalf. We bring in their perspectives. We tell their stories. We connect them to these big spaces and to push for that change, because we need to see those change in the outcome documents, in countries acting. Is very needed, and for accountability. Thank you very much. Back to Christine.
I think we'd learned to unmute ourselves after all these years of being Zooming. But thank you, Sonia, for sharing that. And for me, what's so important about having your voice and 350.org is to enable the stories and the evidence you're about to hear from the field, from two leading organizations who are practicing practicing in essence community-driven renewable energy development and women-led development. We need to get these stories up into a greater dialogue and show, as my colleague Sheila Abaraka from Energia often talks about, is that there is an aggregation of impact. When you look across the portfolio of organizations who are working at ground level, we've got real stories, we've got real impact, we've got real asks about finance, which we'll get to a little bit later in this discussion. But connecting this with an organization and a global narrative that's pushing solutions and has access across both the continent, really globally, and has a place at the table is a really important opportunity for our world of energy access. And so with that, I'd like to take us back from the walls and the halls of COP29 and bring us into the field. And I'd like to start with Simbo, Chief Operating Officer of Solar Sister, to share how the work of Solar Sister is really at this nexus of energy access, gender, and climate justice. So Simba, over to you. Please share.
Thank you, Christine. It's wonderful to be here and hear from all the wonderful panelists that spoke before. I feel like I'm right at home in the center of what I do every day, my bread and butter. So I'm Olasimbo Shojinri, and I work with Solar Sister. At Solar Sister, we recruit, train, and support women in the last mile, and we support them to kickstart clean energy businesses. We currently have operations in Nigeria, in Tanzania, and Kenya. And I say at Solar Sister, we actually work very squarely in that intersection between gender equality, energy access, and climate action. The communities where we work have some of the greatest equity disparities, gender equity disparities, income disparities, and they are the lowest electrified rates globally. These communities bear the brunt of the changing climate. Very similar to what Mela was sharing about Kebati as well. We're seeing that these communities, and I just came back from Gogla 2 weeks ago, and they're like, by 2030, SDG 7, we're lacking behind. About 600 million people in Africa, again, will still not be connected if we continue at this rate. Looking at all of that, we at Solar Sister, our theory is that the development of women entrepreneurship can impact those 3 pillars. So that is the energy access, climate justice, and gender equality. So these women in the last mile communities are the actual infrastructure that we need to electrify our communities so that no one is left behind. I know we talked yesterday about these big programs that want to get 300 million out of 600 million, but there's still 300 million people. And the commitment that we have is leave no one behind. So how do we ensure that every single African or every single person in the world, but it seems like Africa is the one that is being left behind in electrification, how do we ensure that everybody has access to clean energy in this day and age? If we look at what Solar Sister has done so far in the 15 years that we've been in existence, we have empowered over 11,000 women. They've reached over 5 million people. We've distributed over 1 million products, mitigated 1.8 million tons of CO2. This is local women in their communities who are distributing this energy one product at a time. So I think this is the traction that we need. It's not just one player, it's all players, but especially women at the last mile. This is the infrastructure. Investment in them is the infrastructure that we need to finally ensure that no one is left behind. Back to you, Christine.
Thanks, Simbo. And if I could just ask you for one little follow-up, because I know your work and how much you're doing. Could you just talk a little bit about how what I call the double energy impact of your model and of working with women entrepreneurs?
Sure. So it's, as you know, just like our name says, the solar there represents the technology, clean energy technology, solar technology, clean cooking technology. This is, the environmental part of things. And our sister represents the gender, right? There is no leaving women behind. I think Mela already alluded to this, Sonia alluded to this earlier. Women and children are disproportionately impacted by energy poverty. And a lot of these communities where we are, it is women in these rural communities, it's women and children that are left behind. All the diseases associated with indoor air pollution is disproportionately borne by women and children. And so it is women who should be at the forefront of ensuring that they have access to clean energy, that we are changing all these harmful behaviors just because we don't have energy. Like, there's really no reason why we should be inhaling 20 packs of cigarette just because we want to cook for our family, just because a woman wants to cook 3 square meals for her family. In this day and age, it really shouldn't be that way. And so at Solar Sister, it's flipping that on its head and ensuring that women are now the solution providers. We're saying that, no, we do not want to continue to be exposed to all the ills and all the ills associated with the changing climate, with energy poverty. We want to be in charge of the solutions. We want to be in charge of ensuring that every last home has access to energy. And I think that's really the ethos of why we exist.
Thank you very much, Simbo. Again, I was on mute. Thank you very much for sharing that. And we look forward to hearing more from you over the course of this discussion. I'm very pleased to invite into the conversation Virginia Sabanda, who is CEO and founder of Whirl, and ask her to share a very interesting microfinance approach to energy solutions at the community level. So Virginia, over to you. Please share with us.
Thank you very much, Christine. I'm Virginia Sabanda, co-founder of Whirl Financial Services that started in 2010. Its inception in 2010, our main focus was to say, how do we make rural communities become self-sufficient? And microfinance, to me, was that particular conduit so that we understand what these communities require, what are their pain points, because we're dealing with issues of economic activity, which will provide income streams from them. And then fast forward into 2020, we then started realizing that there was this space where there were solar loans that we could actually start giving to individuals. So as Whirl Financial Services, what we do is we train communities in groups. We also train them for financial inclusion. We also train them for business skills, because the fundamental issue that we want to deal with first is their economic activity and increase in production. And after that, we can then layer products like solar loans for household use, solar loans for productive use, like solar pumps, solar loans for incubators. Even there's a lot that we can do in rural communities. So the idea around Whirl really is to, how do we make local economies work? Because I realize that waiting for big people to come and try to solve these problems, we will wait forever. And I liked what Christine said, that the aggregation of impact. Imagine if there were a lot more microfinance institutions operating in rural areas, just being very focused and very, very intentional about providing solutions for rural communities. We will make such a good progress in actually dealing with SDGs problems. I know that microfinance for some people is now layered with a lot of challenges because of what has happened, because a lot of money is coming, and which is pressurizing microfinance to overfinance in some cases. Their practices might not be at the level that we expect as human beings, but that's another story. There's a very, very good story around microfinance, which when done properly, it has got this ability to transform communities, and we have got stories and stories around that in Zimbabwe. So far, we have reached out to 25,000 households, right? And of those 25,000 households, 6,000 of those are for Solarize. And this is a company that is not supported by major funders. This is me and a group of team of enthusiastic young people coming together, finding solutions, finding funding as best as we can. We don't have a big funding pot, but we do with what we have. We deal with what we have to try to find what is the solution. So for me, I can actually just give you a very good example. We can go into a community where a woman is still using kerosene. First of all, we start to talk to them, okay, what are your economic activities, generating activities? We fund them for their input. After funding them for their inputs, now they are growing better crops. They are now generating more income. They have more food. Now they'll think, oh, let me buy a lamp for my household. So we then distribute a solar loan for them. So we are slowly, progressively improving livelihoods in rural communities. And for me, this is where my passion is. And this is where, like Kevin says, that the big grids, they are not suitable for a community like Zimbabwe. One, we are very dispersed. So even if you bring a grid, the connectivity of it is not going to work. Therefore, the decentralized renewable energy remains very, very critical in rural communities. And as a microfinance, we want to continue to play our role from both two angles. We are focusing on women very much. Most of the groups that we form, the women are the ones who come for training. And more importantly, we want them to be economically active first and foremost, and then we layer it with all these other products that are very interesting. I'll stop here for now, Christine.
Thank you so much, Virginia. And I think what Virginia's work in the rural communities of Zimbabwe indicate, and again, reflecting back to Kevin's framing, is that you need to look at the context. And, you know, the actual solar technology, the solar solution, is but one element of the overall transformative solution. It also includes finance. It also includes training. It also includes capacity building. And so that is a really critical element of what we're trying to bring out through the SHINE collaboration, is that it's going to take a mix of all of these inputs and all of these investors and funders, and it's got to be really focused around development, of which energy access is a core ingredient. So with that, I'd like to shift gears a little bit. We've tossed around the word community. We've tossed around women and where does gender justice fit in a just energy transition. So I'd like to ask Simbo and Virginia and Sonia and Mela to briefly tell us where community fits. What does community mean in your work? And where are women within the context of community? So if I could, Simbo, go to you first to help us understand that. Where's community? What's it mean?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, we've tossed around a number of words, women, community, also, you know, talking about disproportionately affecting and what that means. If we look at the living conditions in the communities that we are, by last mile communities, I mean remote communities or rural communities, different words to explain these communities where women live. But you find that culturally, especially in the communities that we live in Africa, or in the areas that we live, let me not use the same word community, in the geographic locations that we live, right? We find that women are the ones that have to, like, just culturally, the ones that have to work several hours, 20 hours a day, collecting fuels or collecting water, sometimes managing how energy is used in the home. And you find that their place, it means that a lot of times the young girls sometimes are not able to go to school or are vulnerable in that time, or even that the time lost is time that could have been used for economic activities. And if we relate this to energy, we find that there are very few organizations who are willing to go all the way to the last mile because of profitability. And so women, as I said, are the infrastructure that will need to happen to bring this thing together in the community. So for us to continue to to survive in that community, to have a thriving community, the women now have to be in charge, are at the forefront of ensuring that these solutions are used by them and their communities as well. So this is where they live. This is their bread and butter. This is their homes. And as so women, just traditionally in our rights of nurturing and looking after the home, this is an important aspect as well that women are at the forefront of. So yes, I've seen, in the communities where we've worked, we've seen this, just the single fact that a woman is able to start and grow a clean energy business. We've seen financial stability for her. We've seen increased decision-making in the household. We've seen confidence in these women entrepreneurs, improved light hours, light qualities for the communities, millions of dollars saved just by switching from using harmful fuels to clean energy. We've seen improved health and environmental outcomes. And I feel like this is the critical role that women are playing in communities to ensure that the entire community is thriving and safe. Again, you're mute.
Got it. You know, I'm just leaving it on, and if you hear noise in the background, you're just going to have to deal with it. Sorry about that again. But I think what you've shared is a really important reflection, which is that because often we hear, I've heard the comments in different circles, well, it's just a woman entrepreneur. How is that changing the system? And I think we have to recognize it's one of the tools in the toolkit of systems change. It's one of the ways by which we're lifting not just that woman, but basically a modeling for future generations, and also giving evidence in a community of what can happen. The one element of Solar Sisters work that I just want to highlight, and then I'd like to just quickly jump to Virginia, is that you also bring your women together. And it goes to the collective action that Sonia mentioned before. So there's a cross learning that's going on also within the 10,000 plus women entrepreneurs that Solar Sister has lifted up. Virginia, let me turn to you and ask the same question, and just a slightly different element, given the fact that you're entering energy access in the role as a microfinance institution. When you go into your communities, I know that you're active in the community of Bikita, not necessarily with the same women's groups that Mela has yet. You're not working with the groups that Mela's and SHINE's engaged with. But how do you adjust your risk models based on the communities within which you're going? And how do your branches manage gender dynamics? If you could share with us a little bit about how Viral deals with that.
Thank you very much. So as a microfinance, we are very, very cognizant of the fact that group lending methodology is a very good method of bringing women together to understand their needs. And then from there, we learn how we can design products that are suitable for them. And what we seek to do as a microfinance is first and foremost to have a deeper understanding of the local dynamics in any community that we get into. We conduct thorough assessments to understand local customs and social norms. And there's this idea that if we just take women out and train women alone without understanding that they're coming from families, we might be actually creating a problem in the future. So we are very cognizant of that fact that we really need to make sure that we are looking at the family household. For a microfinance, we find that that is very, very critical so that we do not destroy family dynamics. So we also we will look at making sure that we develop a context of specific scoring models for individual customers, where we want to understand what is it that you do, how are you generating your income streams, and how do we come in to help you to assist to grow your income streams. We also realize that it is very, very important in our risk modeling to look at the different repayment schedules. When we are dealing with these communities that we are dealing with, we have to really understand that income streams are very irregular. So from a microfinance perspective, you have to make sure that your risk matrices takes into account that. So if you are lending somebody who is waiting for seasonal rain, you need to make sure that their repayment structure is aligned to when they are going to be marketing. So one of the things that we are really looking at is the issue of climate effect on the operations of these poor people. Already they are in areas where, in most cases, they are in Region 5 in Zimbabwe, for instance, where the rainfall is very irregular as well. So we also want to look at how do we then factor in the issue of solar pumps to help them to just improve on the work that they are doing in their fields, because basically most of these communities, their source of income is on-farm activities, about 80% of them. Then out of that, we also lend to SMEs who are in communities. These might be value-adding These might be just selling groceries. These might be selling inputs, because we are trying to make sure that we are designing an ecosystem within a certain geographical area. So this takes a lot of work. It's not something that you just come in and just make sure that you think that just because you've got money within a short period of time, you are able to give everybody money. You need to have a very holistic approach to everything, because what is very critical in the microfinance model is to make sure that you are lending to someone who is capable to pay that money back. We also make sure that we have a robust risk management practice. This we are always training our loan officers to equip them to be able to deal with how to assess risk all the time. We also have to make sure that we do have strong internal controls as an organization to just make sure that we really are understanding what it is that we are doing within the communities. We are not doing harm in communities. That is very, very important for me in particular, and for the rest of the team in Veil Financial Services. We also make sure that we have got regular monitoring. So when I'm talking about regular monitoring, this is where I always refer to what we do as a compassionate business model. So if you are going to reach the last end user that we are dealing with, you find that the cost of issuing that loan, which is a small loan, is very, very high. So you need to be very clear and be very intentional that this is not a business that is going to generate very quick profits. It is a business that is driven by impact. You want to see how you are impacting a community in a sustainable way. And this is what drives us at Veil. And yes, we do have a focus on women, because we just take a position to say 60% of our borrowing customers at any one time should be women. We are very intentional about that. We don't always meet that target, but that is our intention. And we look at promoting gender equality to make sure that our staff, even a staffing level from our board membership composition, our management, our staffing, and then how do we reach out to women. So all those things, we factor them into the processes that we do every day. And more importantly, we also offer financial training, because it is very irresponsible to just go and give money to somebody, or a loan for a solar product to somebody who doesn't understand the impact of not being able to repay that loan, how it can affect them. So we have a very important role that we play, that before anyone gets any financial assistance from Veil, be it for input, be it for solar products or solar freezers, they have to be taken through some financial literacy training. Over time, we also want to skill up these customers. We do run very basic business skills to say, okay, you know what you're doing, but you could be doing some things better. We also try to help them with market linkages, especially those that are in agricultural value chains. We try to help them with also identification of markets and just general market linkages. We don't force them, but we just open up their minds. We are giving them a lot of information so that when they make a decision to lend, because for me, that is the major risk mitigant. When somebody makes a decision to lend, they must be well equipped to understand what that implies if they are not able to repay that loan. So we do have women-only groups, but what we do is from time to time, we invite their spouses so that they understand, why are we doing this with these women? We want to empower women, but we want the family dynamic to remain intact. I'll give you a very good example. I learned this when we were saying, okay, women, we can give you a loan. I didn't worry to say, okay, does your husband know? I know sometimes this can seem like we are going backwards, but what I found out is we gave this woman a loan, we did everything. By the time that she was struggling to pay, we then had to contact the husband, because obviously we wanted him to understand what was happening. And the man just says, I didn't know this was happening in my household. I wish I had known that was happening. I wasn't going to stop here, but it would have been good for me to know. So I learned early in my career, when I branched off from commercial banking to do my own microfinance, is to say family dynamics in microfinance, they really, really matter. And we need to be very sensitive to that. Thank you very much, Christine.
Thank you so much, Virginia. And I think what's really important in, well, many things that we bring up in your comments was how, from a finance intervention through a microfinance approach, you're looking at it holistically, and that you're recognizing that, again, as I've mentioned, and I think it's come across a number of times in Simbo's comments as well, finance is just one input. The renewable energy technology is just one input. There's capacity building, there's market understanding, there's cultural and community context. And so I think that, again, reinforces the framing that Kevin laid out for us at the beginning. And these are real examples that feed into, if you will, the evidence base upon which that work can proceed and expand. Mela, I'd like to jump to you, and if you could briefly take us, what does community mean, not just in Bakita, but in the work that SHINE is doing in two very different locations from Bakita, which is Malawi and South Africa? Just share with us a little bit. What does community mean there, and how does the role of women in local women's organizations link into that community work?
Thank you very much, Christine. And I'm going to share with you from the SHINE way. So when we look at community as SHINE, we're looking at it as double-pronged or multi-pronged, because we have the community as defined by certain characteristics, social identifiers, culture, social norms that they share. And based on that and their vulnerabilities and also their resources within that community. And therefore, we have communities that we work with as the communities that are living in the disaster-prone areas, who are part of indigenous groups, who are part of communities living in the informal sector, who are part of the community that is living without access to energy. And we totally understand that community can mean anything. Community can be a community of academics. It can be anything. But in this case, when we talk about we're doing this work in communities, this is based on that understanding. But the way that we view the communities, we do not view them as people who are waiting for a savior to come from elsewhere. We respect the knowledge that they have as indigenous communities, as communities living in rural areas and who are living the climate crisis, who actually understand climate change in their own way, who also understand energy access, energy poverty in their own way, and who have the solutions amongst themselves that we can work together with them. But we are not coming in as some people who know what has to be done and who are just going to, give knowledge or train communities. But we also look at ourselves as part of the community as well, in the sense that the learning spaces that we are creating as SHINE, they are core learning spaces because we are co-creating knowledge together. We believe that as SHINE and our partners within the women's movement, the climate movement, and the energy movement and the NGO space, we have a duty to learn from each other, including the communities that we are working with as holders of knowledge that has sustained the forest, the ecosystems to be in perfect health the way we see today. And therefore, we believe that they also have the solutions. They have the solutions to energy poverty. They should be in the driving seat. This is why we talk about community driven, because they are sitting on the driving seat. And then we have, maybe I would call it a community of practice. And that community consists of all the NGOs we're working with, the funders as well, because what we're also looking at as SHINE is to influence the funding streams. Where is the money going? Where is the funding going? And how is it going to drive the needs of the communities that we are working together with? And so we bring them in as well as part of our community of practice. We also bring in the women-led power enterprises, the financiers of the energy systems that we are looking at, to form part of our community of practice, a community of continuous learning, a community of shifting narratives. And we also work with the faith-based institutions as part of our community. And I can see, let me just acknowledge one of the people that I've seen among the attendees, Melvin Gwamure, who is coming from Catholic University, someone that I've known for a very long time, who forms part of the community coming from faith-based organizations, but as well the academic space, is all a community of learning and defining what a gender-just energy transition should look like, and what energy justice looks like, and climate justice, and all these buzzwords that we're coming with. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Mela. And there are many slogans and buzzwords in our work, but I hope that so far we've been able to share what they actually mean in implementation, and what they mean to the women in the communities who are the ones suffering in energy poverty. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, and Kevin, I'm going to ask you to come back and join us as well for this question, which is, I want to talk about climate finance. We've referred to finance, we've referred to, the fact that so much of the attention at COP29 is going to be around finance, but I'd like to start with just a few data points that inform SHINE's evolution at looking at this nexus. And when we can share if there's interest in where this data comes from. In 2021-22 period, from a recent climate policy initiative landscape of Africa finance, climate finance, only 18% of annual mitigation needs and 20% of adaptation needs were met of the total needed for Africa. Only 18% mitigation, 20% of adaptation. The reality being, we don't know what the true costs of adaptation and resilience are going to be. It's not yet forecast. And that each year we don't fund, the cumulative investment gap grows even wider. Then you look at the number that less than 2% of global climate finance, which is already undercommitted. So it's 2% of a low number. Only 2% is specifically tagged for gender inequality, to address gender inequality. Less than 2% of philanthropic giving was for climate mitigation, which is only about $200 million. Not a lot of capital when you look at the end of the day and you look at the number of countries suffering climate impacts. And Climate Works Foundation noted that funding for adaptation and resilience isn't even tracked within the philanthropic community. Only 9% of all energy sector development finance had a specific gender equality objective, 9%. And on top of this is the fact that in 2022, women-led power enterprises, those that are working in decentralized renewable energies, received 0.01% of the total financing that went to the off-grid solar sector. Locally owned companies, local entrepreneurs, women and men, received only 5% of the total financing. So my question to our esteemed group here is, if we wish to influence the flow of climate finance to energy access that is community-driven, women-led, what evidence do we have? So that's going to be my question to Simbo, Virginia, and Mela. I'm sorry, not Mela, Virginia and Simbo. And then to Sonia and Kevin, how do we scale this? How do we really make the case that decentralized renewable energy is a solution to the climate crisis, is a solution to anti-fossil fuel, and is the means by which real adaptation and resilience is going to happen? So big question. We're not going to get it all today, but I'd love to have some real seeds of thought from you all on how do we stimulate climate finance to the work at the local community level with women-led opportunities. Simba, over to you first, please.
Okay, I thought Kevin was setting the scene, but should I jump in or should I let Kevin go?
No, please, you go first.
Okay, I think you have summarized the stats. For me, really depressing stats as to how much actually comes to women or even like off-grid and mitigation projects. But I think that many hurdles, including poverty, gender inequality, discrimination, all contribute to this huge financing gap. And this huge financing gap, again, is disproportionately felt by the African woman. Yeah, Sonia mentioned it. Christine, you've also said it. Women lack access to just consumer credit from even traditional sources. And thanks to people like Virginia, women are able to get some of this financing. But if we also look at how women access finance, we see that there's also another disproportionate effect there on women. And so what that has meant is at Solar Sister, we've had to access the capital locally within the resources that we have to grow the businesses and the consumers. So it's one thing for the women entrepreneurs to have credit, is another thing for the consumers and the customers who are buying the products to also have access to this credit. So, we've evolved our program to also provide about 10,000 interest-free loans till date to really help women kickstart and grow their businesses. But it's not just the credit, it comes alongside training curriculum, which reinforces lessons on finance, how to handle risk, credit risk, record keeping, and all the other trainings that they need. So again, women entrepreneurs are deeply embedded in the communities where they live and work. And as such, we are deeply or uniquely positioned to raise awareness on clean energy solutions and to drive behavior change. So investment in things like educational campaigns and community advocacy, and also amplifying the voices of women, as Sonia said, even to the highest levels, will ensure that we can drive these investments to where I believe is needed the most. Women entrepreneurs in these communities, at Solar Sister, we've provided business coaching. As you said, it's not just the finance. It has to come alongside the business coaching, literacy, digital literacy. One of the surveys we did really recently is in the world now, a lot of people are solving solutions with an app, right? You just, it's an app, go to an app. But then you see that there's a digital divide. A lot of women, especially in remote communities, do not even have access to the smartphone, touch less of access to an app. So, having the digital literacy incorporated into our training, mentorship, coaching, a trusted product pipeline as well, all of these things help this woman-to-woman network to build access to affordable and clean energy. So I feel like these are the type of interventions that we really need that can help move the needle and show the world that the women in the communities are ready for this investment. Surely the world can figure out a way to get money to them. I've sat on panels where the big banks are like, we have this money, we don't know how we can get it to women. We know we can figure this out. It's not that difficult. Let's find a way to ensure that the investment gets to where it's needed the most. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you, Simba. Virginia, can you share your thoughts on, I know that, you mentioned that you've been around since 2010, if I recall, so 14 years. And, what are some of the ways you think it's possible for your work and the work of all of us in this community to show that our efforts have climate impacts?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Christine. I just want to turn this question on its head. Why? Because I feel as entrepreneurs, as women, we have shown, like Sibo is saying, that we have done all these things. We have been reaching out to women. We have shown that they can repay their loans. But the question that I probably have, Christine, is to say, who are the right people we should be engaging for them to understand that they in this. I struggle as Virginia, despite the fact that this business has been sustainable for 14 years, reasonably profitable, not super profitable because it simply cannot, but I have shown that it is sustainable. So for me, the question is, there has been a lot of work that has been done to support that. When done properly, it is possible to reach out to people with fund money and then they can repay. And there's been a lot of research that has been done that shows the gaps and everything. I feel that there is no intentionality from the people that are holding the money as to what exactly do they want to do. There's a lot of talk around this issue, but there is no intentionality and there's no action. So for me, the question is, who are the right people we should be talking to? Who should be able to then open these doors up? My business has been funded, especially the solar loans, has been funded in part by grant finance. And by their nature, grant finance, you wait for a call. You go through all the hoops, and it takes you about 2 years of actually maybe one of the investee company that has been given money. But I've been in business for 14 years. Surely I don't have to continue to be standing in front of people, pitching to people about things. People should just look at the facts, and the facts are there that we actually are managing to reach out to these individuals, and with more funding and with more players, not just for one microfinance, one super microfinance, but just looking at a number of other microfinance institutions working in different geographical areas. And I want to go back to your point, Christine, of aggregation of impact. We don't need very big people to come and save anyone, particularly in Africa. We just want people who are very intentional to say, okay, where can we find space to work with organizations, whether they're NGOs, microfinance institutions, and any other players, just distributors of solar products. How do we plug in and how do we make this sustainable? For me, that will be my response to this, because Sibo had actually answered the question very, very well. And I just wanted to take a different view and a different look at that question.
Thank you, Virginia. And I'm going to jump to Kevin next, because and then Sonia, I'll leap up to you from the more, if you will, global activist level. But Kevin, I'm coming to you with this question because part of what your work originally and now is seeking to do is to couple the energy access impacts that we've heard from Simbo and Virginia that's happening at ground level, and couple that with how we think about adaptation and resiliency. Because part of what we need, we need evidence, right? We need to show that energy access is making these impacts. How do we do that based on, what are you seeing as those linkages or those opportunities? And then how do we scale it? If we're really talking about community up and not top down, how do we scale these really diverse and sometimes small opportunities? Your thoughts based on the work you've done, both in terms of research as well as your field work.
Thanks, Christine. Scaling is the eternal question, very challenging. The panelists have already covered a lot of great points, so I'll try not to repeat. I guess intuitively, it feels like decentralized renewable energy products lend themselves more to bottom-up approaches. But I think it's important to point out that it's not automatic and it takes an effort. And I think that's coming out quite strongly across the panelists. And as a result, we still have questions around who's still not accessing energy and why. And we need to really build that evidence, as you've already explained. And as we touched upon, I think it's often the people experiencing different forms of marginalization through gender, poverty, and so on. I think it's unlikely that a large company that has reached some type of scale, a company like D-Light, like B-Box, like Huss Power Systems, who are ultimately beholden to their investors first, they're not going to be able to fully deliver on the principles that we're talking about today around just transition and so forth, unless they get some miraculous, true impact investor, which I don't know if that exists or not. But I'm thinking of impact investors who don't accept double-digit returns, who can deliver patient capital, these kinds of things. I'm not sure that actually exists, but it's companies like Solar Sister here that that's already been highlighted so well. Look at the business model. It's focusing on support for pillars of the community, and it's women. And I think that's also summed up nicely in what Virginia said about having a compassionate business model in microfinance. I really like that idea. And this brings us, I think, to an interesting example around electric cooperatives. So we haven't talked much about mini grids, but in the US, Costa Rica, Bangladesh, and other contexts, it's scaled and it's done incredibly well. It's owned by members, also the people using the energy. It's rooted in cooperative principles like equality, autonomy, democracy, self-help, mutual aid, solidarity, and a couple others, which are very similar to what we're talking about today and trying to achieve in the just transition. So I think one way to think about this is through the structure of the business model and the incentives of those models. And, you know, cooperatives, for example, are asking for the same things that companies are asking for: patient capital, capacity development, streamlining regulation, standardization. These are all things that can help us. But it's not a model that will work everywhere, but it's an option. And some donors have refused to fund, for example, among, you know, many other things they refuse to fund. Why wouldn't we want to go this community-led route? It's a bit of a mystery to me at the moment, but I guess it is around the evidence, and we need to bring these voices up. And it's the burden of institutes like my own to talk to donors and bring those voices and make those links as best we can in our position of privilege. And you can also talk about indicators and requirements within these structures. So, for example, Virginia mentioned that the Microfinance Institute has a gender parity requirement for positions, and then also within its portfolio. And I think that's really important. And communities themselves can kind of help shape these things. So it is also about processes. So thinking about scaling, we have contexts which are different, and that does not lend itself easily to scale. So we have to think about some of the processes that we're using to understand community needs, women's needs, and so on and so forth, trying to unpack these things that we've talked about: power, agency, vulnerability, marginalization, and so forth. And there's lots of examples that we've heard today and others out there on best practices. If we can streamline processes and try and get it right and start picking out some of the characteristics that, you know, are representative of different types of contexts, I think we can start, you know, reaching for the type of scale that we would like to see. But they don't lend themselves easily to scale, and it's quite challenging. And we need to continue building the evidence, and we need donors, philanthropic capital to step in and really start funding a comprehensive, you know, evidence base.
Thank you, Kevin. And I can say that is very much what SHINE is looking to do in its next couple of years of activities, is to really pull from our own experience as well as our partners, and to share those approaches, to look at what is replicable both in the process and you know, the implementation of such process, understanding what needs to be adapted in order for that to be replicated, because that's how we get to scale. Over the course of my career, I've been very frustrated when people leap from "this is working here, let's scale," when the reality is you have to assess, as you said right at the beginning, it sits within a context. What has to be adapted, you know, before we get to a point of replication? And so I certainly really welcome how you've described that, and streamlining processes and approaches. And just a plug here for my colleagues at the Selco Foundation, who have done some really incredible work looking at the ecosystem and what is needed within that ecosystem from a process perspective. Sonia, you and your organization and colleagues and your network sit within so many of these more regional and global conversations. And you talked about finance and the 3 trillion that's not happening. How does all of this feed into your work and your narrative and your collective action? And what do you see that works from this and what you need more of?
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine. Yeah, and thanks for that interesting question. I think that for us, the most important thing that we are seeing is what is the most critical thing that we need to address right now. And for us, the most critical thing is clean, renewable energy at the community level that is embedded in gender justice. There is no doubt about that. But whilst doing that as campaigners, many times we run the risk of leaving that behind, because when you're in those rooms, you're in those spaces, you're on the streets, it's very easy to get excited about what I'll call little kind of crumbs thrown at us based on commitments that you made. And I think the stats that you gave were quite staggering. And so I think that it's really very important for us to look at how we scale that up. And for us, one of the key things we look at is one, the community level. So we believe in models that you can actually replicate, models that you can actually promote, models that are tried and tested, that you can showcase at the global level, showcase at even the national level to say that these are working. And our work in Uganda and in Tanzania with our partners, where we are looking at the communities around the eco pipeline, we campaigned against that. And so what we are doing next is to ensure that these communities are connected to companies that will provide solar energy, particularly to women, in ways that and provide the type of energy that they clean, renewable energy in ways that they need. And so we're having that engagement. So that is one level. The second level, another example is our power work in Asia, within the Pacific, and the same thing in Brazil, around the Amazon. So we are also looking at a solar project. We've already started the work, and it's a similar model to what we have. So they're all unique in their own ways, but we work clearly with in indigenous communities. And we've supported them to actually launch what we call the G9. And the G9 is the 9 countries around the Amazon who are actually at the forefront of the climate justice fight. And what we are actually supporting them to advocate for themselves. So whilst we are looking at financing local communities, we need to create that space. We need to create that opportunities. So that's one way of connecting the dots across. Another way is looking at what we call our networks and our partnerships and the type of activism that we do that draws people for our, what we call our mobilizing moments. Just recently, we launched what we call Our Own Power Network. And Our Own Power Network is actually bringing a fresh breath of life to our partnerships work, and also the type of trainings that we do with what we call power shift trainings, where we train leaders, provide them opportunities. You leave, you go back to your communities, you are leading, you are connecting to the global level, national level, you become an advocate from your local community, and you also have access to the networks. We had 36,000 downloads of tools on the website just 1 month within when we launched it. And we launched it around on the 21st during the Summit of the Future. Why am I saying this? We connected that to the global key moments where the Summit of the Future was happening, the action days, and we launched that. So what it means is that we are putting tools at the hands of activists to actually advocate. So it's one of them. And then the last thing I want to touch on is the opportunities that we have, particularly with COP29, where we are pushing for a new collective quantified goal, which is we want countries to pledge for a climate finance goal that comes in the form of grants. What are we saying? So many times you hear things like money that should be going into climate justice in the global south is actually channeled into other areas like anti-migration moves and initiatives in the global north, in countries that receive a lot of immigrants. And we have the stats there. And we've realized that if we do not have a way of calling for accountability around that, there will be the missing piece. So whilst we are actually connecting all the dots, there's also another opportunity with the defined what we call the nationally determined commitments, that's the NDCs. So as part of the Paris Agreement, what is happening is that countries are supposed to come up with their own local goals, which is by 2025, where they come up with their own ambitions, which is comprehensive, but they are the ones doing that. So one of the ways of actually looking at a scale at the national level with the initiatives at the community level is to ask yourself, what are some of these goals in, let's say, Zimbabwe, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in South Africa, for example? What are some of these nationally determined commitments? What do they look like? How can we influence those goals? Because once they have their goals, there is some form of commitment. It's not guaranteed anyway, but at least you are actually covering the basis for actually meeting those goals. And so we try to do that. And then we now push for that to be funded. So recently we launched our work around the nationally determined contributions, that's the NDCs, around the same time during the New York Climate Week, where we actually shared to a lot of these countries that were meeting in New York, particularly those who must pay, that what do good NDCs look like? When you say you are supporting an initiative, countries are being empowered to have their own goals. They have the financing that they need. Those same governments in the Southern Hemisphere are also committing themselves to their own goals, because it is not just the rich countries that should pay. They also have a commitment to raise money domestically, to utilize the funds that they are getting globally, and to ensure that it gets to local communities. And so there are different dots that I've connected here from our activism work, from our work with partners, from some of these opportunities that we have around the NDCs, looking at new money in terms of climate finance, which should be grants but publicly. So not local grants, because when it is public finance, then there is more accountability. So I think that these are some of the ways that we are trying to do that. And we're also on a learning journey. Since we started the work on renewables, it's actually not an easy road, because it's so easy to shout that no fossil fuels, no new fossil fuels. It's easy to say no to something, but when you start providing solutions, you need to be innovative. You need to actually be connected to local communities to get some of these solutions and examples, which you need to actually showcase and put pressure on. So yeah, so that is where we are now. Back to Christine. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. And I think I highlighted both, why we're all here, and we've brought some diverse voices together. And I take your point, Kevin. The cooperative and the mini grid solutions are something that also is part of the decentralized renewable energy solution. And it's a voice that we will seek to learn from and include, for sure. But the challenge is, how do you connect this evidence into the climate finance world? And there's still so much in flux. We know that so much of the capital, and we're now going to leap into our question and conversation side of this virtual meeting today. We know that there's a lot of funds that are flowing, and a lot of efforts by a lot of the multilateral and collective programs around, emissions reduction. We know that our work at the community level does lead to emissions reduction, but it's very much an issue about adaptation, resilience, and new economic growth and development in local economies. That is what leads to adaptation and resiliency. And so I wanted to address and open this question also to the panel, but we have a question that's come in from Raymond that really is at the heart, Raymond, of what SHINE is trying to do, which is, how do we break down the silos between, you've got energy access over here, you've got climate here, and you've got gender and gender justice and women's rights and feminist movements over here. And what's the way we bridge between them? That's very much what these conversations are seeking to do, because part of our challenge, and then I'm going to stop talking and look to the panel, part of our challenge is that's how funders think. They think there's energy sector energy specialists over here and gender specialists here, and, people who talk about climate finance, which is usually mitigation. What is SHINE in these organizations doing, or how can we do it better? And so I'd like to open that up for the panel. What's worked for you, Simba, as you seek money outside of those who fund energy? Sonia, what's the receptivity within the climate finance world that you deal with to these community-based models? And Virginia and Kevin, please jump in as well.
So really quickly, and I think Sarah, someone in the comment also mentioned this, it's the interlinkages, right? As Christine, as you said, funders think of themselves in sectors. And we think of the challenge in a community level in a more holistic way. So we're like, if this community is going through energy poverty, what does it matter whether it's energy fund or general, it's like, how do we solve the problem? But like funders are thinking, oh, we only do energy. Oh, we only do climate. Oh, we only do gender, right? And they are interlinked. There are several evidences that has been shared today, and so many other reports. I've seen some also in the comments that have proven this linkage, and we also need, I think as we do this, we also need to educate the development partners. We have to educate the funders as well, to also stop thinking about themselves in that way and really think about what is the impact that you are trying to achieve at this community level. Is it livelihoods? Is it, is it uplifting people out of poverty? It's going to take several different approaches. It's not just one approach. And to have them also de-siloed, I think that's a lot of where it is. And I've also seen a criticism, I think, to our own sector is where we try to respond to these funders by developing programs that fit into them. And I think, that has been how the world has done it before. There's a call for proposal, people will write what that is and fit in. But I think we need to step ahead of that and start looking at these evidences, start looking at programs that are working and seeing like, how can we do it better? It's not about being in one sector or the other. How do we ensure that no one is left behind? These are the key questions, and these are the interventions that I believe that money should be put behind.
Thank you. I just have to add one little editorial comment there. You use the phrase that is so prevalent in the energy access world, leave no one behind. I have been working over the last 6 or 7 months with colleagues within the energy access community to help them think about transitioning, leave no one behind, into the framing of a just energy transition. Because if it's just, you've left no one behind. Yet within the energy world, that's not how we speak. We talk about last mile, we talk about leave no one behind. So it's substantive, but it's also language. It's also translation from one sector to another. And I think that's, again, what SHINE and many of our partners are seeking to do, is to enable this translation so there's a fuller audience for the message, or a broader audience for the messages that we're trying to deliver. Virginia, to you. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, to you. How do you answer this question about how do we frame our work? How do we pull more climate money into it? Bridging the gaps, as Raymond has raised.
Thank you very much. I think for me, for starters, we continue to do what we are doing to prove the concept that this works. For me, one of the major challenges is that money follows a trend. It's like a fad. It's like people are not seeking to really solve solutions. It's like when there's something that is interesting, all the money in the funders, they move in that direction. But it's not like the world is moving in tandem like that. So you look at Zimbabwe, we still have a lot of people that are poor. We still have a lot of people who are marginalized. So for me, microfinance makes a lot of sense in so many ways, in the sense that if you fund microfinance practitioners, they in turn improve economic empowerment for grassroots. They in turn increase their need, that Maslow hierarchy. They now are able to deal with their day-to-day needs, shelter, food, clothing. Then they start thinking, oh, there's interesting, we can have solar systems in my house. I can have a solar television, even if I'm not off-grid. But I think the funding just follows certain funds, which I'm up to now trying to understand. We just need to go back to basics. If we are very intentional about not leaving anyone behind, what is making people behind? It's poverty, isn't it? What is it that we need to do? What kind of activities should we be financing to help these people to move out of poverty to a position where they can demand goods and services? So we are dealing with the demand side, whereas a lot of money, in my opinion, goes to the supply side. We are not dealing with the demand side. So we need to see how best we can change that. These two things have got to speak to each other so that we continue to look at improving livelihoods in rural communities. And it can even deal with the issue of immigration that we're talking about, where people are leaving Africa because they are thinking that there's a better life somewhere else. We need now to stop and pause and say, what is it that we need to do for all communities to be able to understand that they can actually have livelihoods here? There's no need to put their lives in danger trying to go elsewhere. So for me, that question is very pertinent because it's not only silos. It's like we've done that, we've dusted, we move on. But life doesn't move in a linear like that. There are some things that you continue to mop up, you continue to improve in different continents to catch up. So for me, that would be my contribution to this particular conversation.
Thank you, Virginia. So Sonia, how do we break these silos at the global level? You're going, you or your colleagues and your colleagues are going to the COP, which is so focused on climate. But the reality is ending poverty, development is core. Help us.
Wow, now I feel intimidated and I would say lost, but because it's a tough one. I think that Olasimbo said something really interesting, which is very true, where for many of the funders and the donors, it is so siloed, gender desk, climate justice desk. So it's into programming. But so this is where it's important that those of us in civil society start speaking the same language and start putting pressure. Speaking the same language has its trade-offs because it's very easy to be the new shiny thing that a donor has seen because they're always looking at what's the latest to fund. But once we start speaking with the same voice, that same voice has to do with the fact that this is a long haul. It is very important for us to be looking at commitments, that's financing commitments that is not just short term. And that has to do with a lot of lobbying. It has to do with so much advocacy. And so what it means is that we need to have champions, both within CS, the civil society organizations, NGOs, and also even with the global north. We need those champions, even with our own local governments, because tax revenue is important. The budget has key priorities, but then money needs to be allocated. And so that is where pressure on pertinent areas like clean, renewable energy at the community level, which will benefit women in particular, is important. One of the key things is that if we get tired of repeating the same thing, we get shut out and shut down. Many times we get tired of hearing the same thing. We get tired of saying the same thing. But what I realize is that the same thing has to be said over and over, but in new ways. So we have to tweak, we have to change, we have to add different sides to it. That is super important. We also need to draw attention to the key issues. And for me, the whole thing about the fact that those who are who bear the brunt of climate injustice are survivors, that narrative seems to be missing. Anytime you see a disaster or a community that is in darkness, where they are using fuel that pollutes the environment, they are seen for, oh, these are poor people. Yes, they are poor, it's factual. But how do we present that evidence about the fact that they are, despite this, they are resilient? I think that we should not get tired. And last thing I also want to say is that we need champions who are citizens in the global north, who are taxpayers, who are voters, who need to put pressure. And so this is where campaigns and advocacy work comes in. That connects
Thank
the
you,
dots
Sonia.
in.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm
that connects the
sorry to
dots.
shorten you
Thank
there,
you.
but I want to bring up the question, which is really slightly is a slight deviation from the question I was going to throw at you. So thank you, Olivia, for raising it. But I'd like each of you to take 1 minute or less to give your quick thoughts, reaction to this. What is your vision of success for a gender-just energy transition? In other words, what does success look like, and how will we know if what we've discussed today has worked? And I'm going to Simbo, I'm going to start with you, please. Quickly.
This is when women are at the front and center of the solutions in the communities. And I think that when you invest in the woman, especially in the last mile communities, that is when we can ensure a gender-just energy transition.
Thank you. Virginia.
Yeah, my key takeaway is when impact investors really understand that we are dealing with people, especially people that are vulnerable. Therefore, our approach to vulnerability should take into account some empathy and some compassion. We can do this. My vision for Zimbabwe is to make sure that we light up the rest of Zimbabwe. It is unacceptable in this day and age that people are still using kerosene.
Thank you. Sonia?
This is where commitments are met and we can trace the money to the local community, where women are using clean, renewable energy and they are able to maintain it and they are able to make money out of it as a business, no matter how small it is. That is success for me.
Kevin.
Really great question. What does success look like and how will we know? And I think it will, again, really depend on each context, and success will look differently across different contexts. And I think that's important to acknowledge. But let's build the evidence and spotlight women's stories and push ahead.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn to Mela with a slightly different question, which is, how does this conversation inform SHINE's work, and what are your key action items for SHINE and for our partners coming from this conversation?
Thank you very much, Christine. I'm going to build on what Sonia has said about ensuring that money reaches the communities, and also that we are on a learning journey, just what Sonia said, that our key action point as we go is, as SHINE, we continue building on what the communities have. I have worked with communities across the continent, and in all communities, we find that all women in communities understand that they are financially excluded from the mainstream financial institutions because of intersecting vulnerabilities that they have. And they have their community saving schemes. In South Africa, they call them Stockvels. In Uganda, they call them with another name. In Zimbabwe, the money go around, where they have their pot of savings and which they use all the time amongst themselves to borrow as a community when there is need, and also how we can build on that and building on communities working as collectives. That it is our vision as SHINE not to disrupt that collectivity that happens in communities, that, you know, communities share draft power and a lot of other things. That can't we, for example, have solar systems or some solar pumps, some irrigation, where communities use as a collective. And it is our vision that we can continue building on that, but as well that we fight for a just energy transition that is not impoverishing to the women, that at least in areas where there is extraction of critical minerals, there are at least some minimum safeguards so that communities are not further impoverished by the shift to renewables, and that women become part of the solutions and not just as victims. And as SHINE, we continue with our learning journey of shifting narratives and building knowledge on the just energy transition, because it is something that is relatively new, and also look into issues of climate finance. How can that also be able to finance the decentralized renewable energy systems that we envision? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mela. And I want to bring us to a close. I want to thank all of the voices who have been part of this conversation, the wonderful panelists, as well as those who contributed on our question and answer. I want to thank Rose for our helping us on the tech and getting us through those little hiccups at the beginning with such grace. And I most importantly want to encourage all of us, those on the line, as well as those who are our participants and those who will receive this and listen to this webinar. We need to think cross-sectorally. We need to get out of our silos. We need to think bottom up. There is certainly benefit for top-down big programs and solutions, but they need to be informed by the voices at the ground level and by the women in the communities. And we will be hosting another webinar in this series, probably in the new year. Definitely in the new year, post-COP, taking learnings from what's coming out of there, and we'll be focusing more specifically around the issue of climate adaptation and resilience, and climate justice. And so I hope you all will stay tuned, follow SHINE and Solar Sister and VEARL and 350.org and IIED and others, and please come back again, and we'll look forward to really making a difference and really living a gender just energy transition. Thank you all very much, and a best of the rest of the day to you all.